Welcome back, everyone. Today I started playing the Fischer Random World Chess Championship being held here in Reykjavik, Iceland. Now, there are many strong players, amongst them the defending Fischer Random World Chess Champion Wesley So, the current Classical Chess World Champion Magnus Carlsen, one of the challengers for the title Jan Nepomniachtchi, as well as the rising junior player Norbek Abdustorov and Russian superstar Vladimir Fedoseev, and of course players like myself. Now, I won a very difficult first round matchup against Matthias Bluebaum from Germany, and in the second matchup I was playing against one of my longtime foes and rivals, Magnus Carlsen. Now, we're going to start with the first game here in Fischer Random. This is a very important game because of the way the opening begins. So I started by playing b3. Now here, Magnus shocks me and pretty much the entire world by playing this move pawn to g5. On first glance, you go, wait a second, white can just take the bishop on h8, and Magnus has hung a bishop on move number 1. How can the world champion make a move like this? Now, as it turns out, this is not actually a blunder, because after knight f6, queen to g7, rook to g8, queen h6, and now this move pawn to d5, black will be able to play rook g6 next move, trapping the queen on h6. Now, if I play a random move like, let's just say knight to a3, just to illustrate the point, after rook g6, the queen simply has no squares. The h4 square is covered by the pawn, the h3 square is covered by the bishop, the h5 and h7 squares are covered by the knight on f6, and of course if I go queen f8, king takes queen would be winning. So after g5, I thought for several minutes, and I finally chose to play this move bishop b2. Now, one of the great things is that in between the first and second games of the mini matches that are being played here, the players are sequestered, so they cannot go and talk to their trainers, they cannot get help in terms of what they should have done during the game, because obviously there will be a second game where colors are reversed and players are not allowed to learn anything from the engines. So during this break, there was a long discussion, which I will talk about, where almost all the players were discussing this position, which can occur after queen h8, knight f6, queen g7, rook g8, queen h6, d5, and this very enterprising move pawn to f4.
Thank you to Athletic Greens for sponsoring this video. Athletic Greens has 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. You'd be hard pressed to find a more comprehensive powder or supplement on the market. It's really difficult traveling all over the world for various chess competitions. Between all the long flights, between the taxis, the hotels, and everything else that goes along with traveling, it's very easy to become tired. And I do hope that AG will help me with recovering from both the stress and the tiredness of all these long voyages for competitive chess tournaments. I will be taking my AG before getting on a plane, knowing that I'm getting important, hard to find ingredients and high level of antioxidants that support immunity. And there we go, you guys. We have our Athletic Green shake right here. Pretty good, pretty good. AG is gluten-free, no eggs, no sugar added, nut-free and dairy-free, no GMOs, no herbicides, pesticides, no artificial colors, flavors, preservatives, or sweeteners. Athletic Greens is going to give my community a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamins D3 and K2 and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Click on the box in the description of the video for my link.
Now, after black plays rook g6, trapping the queen, it gets very complicated because white can take on g5 with the queen, sacrifice, and after knight e4, white should play pawn to d3 here. If white plays knight f3 first, it's a little bit inaccurate because after the very strong move a5, which Magnus found without any computer assistance, if white now plays this move g3, black can play bishop h3, and black is close to winning. And additionally, if white plays a move like d3, knight d6, and now maybe g3 after a move like b5, black again should be better. Now, the reason I illustrate this, or I'm showing this variation, is because there was a big debate. Jan Nepomniachtchi was saying that white should be better in such a position. Magnus was arguing that black has no weaknesses, and black has the queen as well, so black should be better here. So this was just one of many lines we analyzed. I guess I'll show you guys a couple other lines. So in the game I played bishop b2, we got takes, and b6. Now another variation that was discussed between myself, Fedoseev, Magnus, Jan, and company was this line with the move queen to g7 here. And after queen g7, the line that we were looking at was queen to e4. Again, you're probably going to see the eval bar swing because us top classical chess players, we don't know how to play Fischer Random to save our lives. Now after queen e4, the line that we were looking at was queen takes g5, queen takes c2 here, and potentially a move like knight to c3. And we thought that white should maybe be a little bit better, but it's still very, very complicated. At any rate, this is just one of many different lines that was looked at. Another fun line that I'll show you guys was this line with queen e4, and now white plays a move like, let's just say white plays a move like knight to a3, guarding the pawn, and black can play queen g6. queen c3, and black can go queen c6, trying to force a repetition with queen g3, queen g6, or queen g7, queen g6. Of course, that's not what anybody wants when the players are playing Fischer Random, but just to illustrate some sample variations of what we were looking at in between the first and second game. So here I play f4, Magnus plays g4. Now, another critical point is that when you're playing in Fischer Random, you want to generally develop very quickly. Now here I already have to be very, very careful because the move I ideally like to play is g3, opening up the diagonal, but here black would simply capture, and unlike on move number 1, I'm not trapping the queen, because after rook g1, queen h3, black's queen will get out to h6 here. So in this position, I have to find a way to develop the bishop very quickly. Now, what I do in the game is I make a practical decision. I play knight to c3 here. Magnus goes bishop b7, and I choose to play this move e4. The reason is very simple. If I were to play a move like rook f2, after f5, d3, knight f6, it is very unclear how I will ever bring this bishop into the game, because the pawn on g4 will stop me from ever playing knight f3, and this might simply be positionally lost for white already. So in the game, I play e4. Magnus takes the pawn, I take the bishop, and now I go knight e2. And again, the idea is very simple. I simply want to play g3, open up the scope for my bishop on h1, and after I do that, I figure that even though I'm down a pawn, the lack of development for black combined with this awesome bishop on the diagonal and me being able to get my king out of the center should be enough compensation. So here Magnus plays g3, I play pawn takes pawn, and now he goes knight to f6. And again, I have to play very principled here, because if I'm not careful and I do something like, let's say, castles, for example, if black is able to go knight g4 here, this position is probably, again, completely lost, because after I play rook e1 and black plays a move like queen g6, for example, my bishop is never getting into the game. The pawns are in the way, and I simply will be positionally lost once again. So I play this move g4, gambiting the pawn, and now I play g3, opening up the scope for the bishop on h1 here. Magnus chooses to play queen to e6, and now I castle. A very nice move, by the way, which I think Magnus may have missed, because here he plays queen to f6. It's worth noting that after queen takes a2, this would be a big mistake here, because I can play rook d to e1, and after black moves the queen, let's just say to b5, for example, I can go for this killer blow with rook takes e7, king takes e7, and now rook e1 check. Black cannot put the king on f6 because the queen covers it, and if black blocks with the knight, after rook takes knight check, queen takes rook, queen takes queen on e5 will be checkmate. And here, if black plays the move king to d6, I can now play queen d4 check. Bishop covers all the squares, c6 and d5. King cannot go to the e file, and after queen d5, queen takes queen. Very simply, this would be checkmate. So instead, Magnus plays the move queen f6 here, realizing that in this position, he has to play something active. He needs to get the king out of the center quickly and develop this knight. So here I play knight to c3, trying to prevent the trade of the queens, because again, I am down a pawn here. Magnus plays knight to c6, and now I play rook d to e1. Here Magnus decides to castle the queen side, and now I play this move queen to a3. Now, I wasn't sure if queen to a3 was actually the best move during the game. I also thought about maybe playing the other order with takes and queen a3, and after a5 this would transpose to the game. Now, the reason I didn't do this is because I thought after queen a3, if black tries to play this d5 move, for example, preventing me from taking the knight on c6, I cannot take the pawn on d5, because after rook takes bishop, knight takes rook, there's a classic logic checkmate with queen a1, like it was demonstrated in the game between Ludwig and Logic in PogChamps 2, I believe it was. At any rate, after d5, however, I thought here I could play something like f5. Black cannot play e6 because I will be able to just capture the pawn, and I think this diagonal is going to eventually open. It's worth noting that it seems that my intuition is correct, because when I'm looking at the evaluation, computer is saying white is significantly better here. So Magnus plays the practical choice. He goes a5, and now I already to bail out. Now, it's really tragic, because I would love to try and attack somehow on this diagonal, but the problem is that black is already simply too solid here. So I play bishop takes knight, pawn takes, I play queen takes e7, Magnus goes queen to d4, now I play rook to e2, and Magnus plays h5. Now, the smoke is cleared more or less. We have equal material here. We're in a late middle game, potentially an end game soon. Again, with even material, white is maybe very slightly better, just because black has double c pawns as well as the weak pawn on h5, but realistically, this should be a draw. So I go queen g5 here. Magnus plays knight to f6, bringing the knight back, guarding the pawn, also threatening to play rook g8. So I go rook f3, rook g8, queen to f5 check, and now we get king b7, king b2, rook to d5, and now unfortunately here I have to play this move rook e5. What I was really hoping for in this position is that Magnus would maybe play something like a4, for example, and now I have this very nice move rook d3, overloading the queen on d4. Queen cannot go anywhere to guard the knight because the only square where it's guarding is d4. If you go like queen b4, for example, I can just trade the rooks and take the knight and win the game. But Magnus, being super precise, plays rook d5 here. I cannot take, of course, because of the pin, so I play rook e5. We trade, and now this pretty much fizzles out very quickly here. We get this endgame with queen e6, trade, knight e2, and the rest is pretty straightforward here. Not much to talk about. So we end up drawing this first game here. We get this rook and pawn endgame, nothing too exciting. Finally with a threefold, and we draw our first game in the mini match. So first game is a draw. I don't really feel like I had many chances, even though it was an interesting game, but alas, it is what it is. So now we'll move to the second game where I play with the black pieces against Magnus. Now keep in mind that, again, having played the first game, you know what everybody is thinking. So b4 is played here by Magnus. Now I thought for quite a while here on my first move because I was unsure. Do I want to play g5? Now keep in mind that we had a bunch of us had analyzed this line before the game, but I was really unsure. For example, like, you know, Magnus said that he thought the black was better in that position with the queen for the rook and the bishop. But maybe Magnus didn't actually believe that and he was bluffing. It's always possible. So after b4, I decided, okay, enough with the analysis and trying to go into something that everybody looked at in between the game. I'm just going to play a little bit more logically. So I play d5 here. We get g3 from Magnus, and now I play pawn to c6, creating a classic connect 4. Magnus goes bishop g2. I play knight to f6 here. He goes a4. Now this is already a move that I'm not a super huge fan of. I feel like in this position it might have made more sense to play something like a3, bishop b2, and eventually d3 and c4, but Magnus chooses to play a4 here. Interestingly enough, actually, computer thinks a4 is the best move. So after a4, I choose to play g6 here, and now after g6, Magnus plays knight to f3. I play knight a6, attacking the pawn on b4. Magnus plays bishop a3. I go knight to e4, queen a2, and now I play this move knight d6. Now the idea that in terms of what I'm angling for is very simple. I feel like Magnus is playing very much on the wing here, and it seems a little bit premature. It also seems kind of wrong because generally in chess you want to play in the center. So Magnus plays d3, I castle, he castles, and now I play a very thematic move, pawn to b5. Idea is very simple. I want to prevent white from ever being able to play b5 and open up this diagonal. Additionally, this pawn on b4 is now a little bit weak, and the bishop is staring at a closed diagonal. So here we get queen b3 being played by Magnus, and now I take on a4, he takes back, and I play this move queen to b7. Now after queen to b7, Magnus chooses to play c3, guarding the pawn on b4, and here I play this move bishop d7. Now in retrospect, I'm not very happy about this move. I felt that I probably should have played something like rook fe8 and e5, just trying to get a big black center, but I decided to play bishop d7. Magnus goes queen to c2. And now I play this move rook c8. Now initially I was very happy because I thought I'm going to play c5, say white goes knight d2, c5. This diagonal is amazing, the c-file is opening up, and it feels like white will have a lot of problems here. But then Magnus played d4, and initially I just assumed this is such an ugly move, it creates Swiss cheese, there are holes on c4 and b5, that it can't be good. But as Magnus was thinking, and before he played d4, I started to realize that this move could be a big problem, because even though there are these holes on c4 and b5, that doesn't mean that I can effectively use them. So I play knight c7, goes knight bd2, knight c to b5, again trying to keep the knight on d6 to target both the e4 and c4 squares. Bishop to b2 is played, and now I go bishop f5, queen b3, and here I play a move that is a fairly, I don't want to say fatal blunder, but a move that should have cost me the game. Now in this position, I already felt like I was letting some stuff slip away, and I felt like I had to do something active. So I chose to play this move a5. If I could do it all over again, probably I would have just played knight to e4 here, trying to stabilize the position and reduce the chances of potentially losing. But instead I go a5, Magnus takes the pawn, and now after a long think, I played this move queen c7. Initially, I wanted to play rook a8, and after rook a1, I wanted to go rook fb8. And I just figured that in this position, there's so many threats. White cannot put a rook on b1 to guard. And let's just say white plays a random move like h4, for example. I felt that there are a lot of ideas, like maybe even knight takes c3, because queen b7 allows knight e2, and then rook b7. Maybe even potentially something like knight d4 might exist here as well. And I just felt like there's a lot of counterplay here to offset this pawn, which I also think is probably a big weakness on a5. Unfortunately, as I realized during the game when I was thinking after b takes a5, in this position after rook fb8, white can play a couple moves. The simplest one is to play this move queen to a4 here, and now if I try to play knight takes d4, white can simply take back, and after queen takes b2, white can grab this pawn on c6, and with this very passive bishop on h8 that's not in the game, combined with this very strong passed a pawn, white should be a little bit better here. So already I was very unhappy, and I burned a lot of time coming up with this queen c7 move. Magnus plays queen a4, I go rook a8, rook a1, I play rook fb8 again, and now he plays rook c1, and here already I felt like I was in a lot of trouble potentially, but fortunately, because I literally don't care, I was able to just keep my wits about me and play logical moves. So here I play knight to e4. Now, the reason I play this move is very simple. Conceptually, when you look at this, of course, knight takes d4 isn't good because after takes rook c6, white is better. I also can't take on c3 because of take, so it's almost like I want to move the knight. Now, if I move the knight to a7, the problem is white goes bishop a3, and now the knight's in the way of the rook, so I can't capture the pawn on a5. So conceptually, I'm like, okay, I want to move this knight, but I can't move it. So by playing knight e4, I create a square on d6 where I can move it to. So for example, say white plays knight f1, knight d6. Now if white moves the bishop to a3, there are moves like knight c4, but just to illustrate the point, I can actually just take the pawn on a5, and in this position after takes, knight d6, black should be completely fine. So when I played knight e4, the idea is very simple, to create the square, so when white moves the bishop to a3, I can play rook takes a5. So after knight e4, Magnus trades, I take back, he goes knight to d2. Now, in a classical game, I do suspect Magnus might have found the best line here, which is somewhat counterintuitive, to play the move c4. Now after c4, I follow through with my plan of playing knight to d6, I target the bishop on b2, but after this very nice move, bishop c3, knight takes c4, white is the very smooth idea of retreating the knight backwards with knight to d2. And after bishop g2, king g2, let's say I trade the knights on d2. This position is positionally lost. Maybe lost is too strong, but I have a very weak pawn on c6. White has a very strong protected pass pawn on a5 here with the rook and the queen behind it. And additionally, I have a bad bishop on h8 that's not in the game. So I do suspect if I were to reach this position, I would lose this at least 90% of the time. Again, difficult to find with limited time on the clock, no increment, and Magnus doesn't find it, in fact, in the game. Instead, he plays knight d2, which is also completely reasonable. We trade the bishops on g2, and now I play this move c5. Now, what I really wanted to play was knight to d6, but as I realized to my horror during the game, if I play knight d6 after bishop a3, I have to go queen a5. We trade all the pieces off here, but in this position, after rook to a6, rook c8, and then white plays a move like, let's just say knight b3, c5, e3 here. Actually, maybe c5 is premature, but even bishop g7, knight a5, c5, e3 here. After a move like bishop f8, eventually white will play something like knight b7, and I'm going to lose one of these pawns on d5 or d6, and it's going to be a really difficult endgame that most likely I'm going to lose. And against Magnus, who of course is the most renowned endgame expert in the world, I do not want any part of that. So after king takes g2, I choose to play this move c5 here. Idea is very simple. If white takes on c5 after queen c5, now the c3 pawn is weak. This diagonal is very open here. I can also move the knight back to d6, and I feel like I have some play. So Magnus plays rook c2 after a long think. Now, I don't know if this was the best move, but I was very surprised by it because I had not considered it at all, and then I realized that in this position, the idea is very simple. White wants to play for c4. So for example, if I play a move like bishop f6, white can take and play something like c4, for example, and white is completely winning here because the rook on c2 guards the bishop on b2. Whereas if we go back to, say, this position, after takes c4, bishop takes b2, white cannot capture the knight because I simply capture the rook. Whereas in the game here, if I play, what was the move I was saying? Something like bishop f6, takes c4. If I go bishop b2, rook takes b2, white is, again, just up a pawn. It's protected pawn going down the board. Actually, not protect, sorry, wrong terminology, but it's a pass pawn with a rook and a queen behind it, and white should be winning here. So here I choose to play the move c4 very simply because I figure now at least the knight on b5 is targeting the pawn on c3. White cannot activate this bishop on b2 easily, and so it just made sense to play. So I play c4, Magnus plays knight to f3, and now I play this move knight to a7, trying to reroute my knight to c6 to win the pawn on a5. Magnus goes bishop to a3 here, very good move, and now I play e5. At this point, both of us were fairly low on time, so I didn't end up playing knight c6 because I thought after a6, rook b6, bishop c5. Objectively, I figured that this endgame is probably losing for me with white having the two rooks for the queen. Rooks are very active with rook a2 and rook a8 coming in here, so I didn't really see any hope. So instead I play this move e5. Now the idea behind e5 is quite simple. I have this very bad bishop on h8. I want to bring it into the game, but I also want to put pressure on these pawns in the center of the board. So after I play e5, Magnus takes, I take back, he trades, and here he blunders. He plays this move bishop. I guess blunders is too strong of a word to say because bishop c5 is still very good, but I felt after the game actually we discussed, so we felt that Magnus should have played rook d1 because if I go knight b5, bishop b4, white is probably winning here. So fortunately for me, both of us very low on time, no increment at all. We kind of have to just make decisions. So Magnus takes on e5, he goes bishop c5, and now this very nice move rook b3 because the pawn on c4 or the pawn on d5 supports the pawn on c4, which supports the rook on b3, and in turn I can now play knight b5 and put a lot of pressure on the pawn on c3. Now, it's interesting to note that this was move 30. So we have just reached time control. Both players get 5 minutes with 5-second increment. And in this position, after I want to say a 2.5 minute thing, Magnus does something very uncharacteristic. He plays this move a6. Now, I was very surprised during the game because obviously when you're sitting across on the board, you can sort of sense where someone's hand is going towards the side of the board. And I was really shocked that at this point in the game, Magnus's hand looked to be going towards the queen side, and I really didn't know what was going on. But sure enough, he went and he plays this move a6. Now, after the game, what Magnus explained is sort of a mind-hand malfunction or lack of coordination. Initially, what Magnus was intending to do is to play f3, knight b5, and then pawn to a6. And in this position, white still keeps a fairly significant advantage. Black has some counterplay, but white is to be preferred. At any rate, Magnus plays this move a6, and as soon as he let go, he realized that I have this move queen e4, checking both the king on g2 and attacking the rook on c2. So here, Magnus, after a bit of a think, plays king g1, I take the rook, and he goes queen d7. Now again, in this position, I used a little bit of time. I think I had about 6 minutes. I used maybe a minute and a half here before playing this move rook to b1. Now the reason I did is very simple. I didn't see the instant win on the spot, even though queen f5 is actually winning quite simply, but I didn't see the win on the spot, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go into an endgame where I know that I'm going to be winning 90% of the time. So I play rook b1, we trade, king g2, I play queen to b5 here, only move is queen to b7, we trade, I go rook b8, takes, bishop d4, and now I bring the king to the center. Now in this position, the reason that I was sure this is winning is very simply because in the long term, if white just waits, for example, let me illustrate the point. Eventually, I'm going to be able to bring the king over, bring the rook in, sacrifice the rook for the pawn, and simply win the game with the c-pawn going up the board. So I figured because of this imbalance in the pawn structure, it had to be winning. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but I didn't really see how I could be wrong. And again, with only a bishop on the board that's targeting the dark squares, white does not have any counterplay. So here Magnus plays g4, king e7, g5, king e6, plays f3, rook to b1, e3, king d6, king g3, and now I go king c6, king f4, I play rook f1, plays h4. Rook f1, by the way, very important move, because if white can bring the king in, say for example I go king b5, king e5, there is now some counterplay, potentially with king f6 takes f7, or king e5 takes d5. So I play rook f1 to prevent king e5, because then I can just capture the pawn, and I also prevent king f6, plays h4, and now after I play this move king b5, Magnus resigns here for a couple of reasons. First of all, I have a very simple idea of going king a4, king b3, followed by rook c1 or rook takes c3. Secondly, white doesn't have counterplay. If Magnus plays king e5 here, I can just take, king takes d5, and I can go rook h3. This maybe is not the cleanest way, but this is good enough to win the game. After e4, rook takes h4, bishop f6 here. I'm not even sure. Probably simplest is something like something simple, something like h5 here, and after takes, white really has no chance at all. And if Magnus doesn't play king e5, as I said, let's just say he goes e4, for example. Again, I can go king a4, and after f4, I go king b3, king e5, and now rook f3. Important move, preventing white from going king f6 again. And after king e4, rook takes c3, the game will simply be over. So after I play king b5 here, Magnus resigns the game, and with that, I win my second mini match of the day here in the Fischer Random World Chess Championship Tomorrow, I will be playing 2 mini matches against Vladimir Fedoseev. I will obviously be doing a recap of those as well. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you have not already, and I'll be back with more great chess content tomorrow. Hope you guys enjoyed it. See you soon. Bye.